Hello, and welcome to Module 5 of Linking Literacy and Assessment. This week we're going to be talking about developing readers. And the thing that's so interesting about developing readers is that instead of our focus being on learning to read, we're actually focusing more on reading to learn. And so with that, we're not going to be so focused on the phonics and the sight words. Those are still important, but our focus goes a little bit from those and more into the vocabulary and comprehension and even fluency for these students. So if you have a developing reader, these are the things that you should be really paying attention to. Now this week you have a chapter in your Gillett text to read about developing readers, and it'll talk about the different kinds of assessments you need to give a developing reader, and it also talks about the different kind of instruction that a developing reader will need rather than, an emergent, beginning, or fledgling reader. So there's quite a bit of a difference in the instruction that you'll give those students. You have that chapter to read, and then you also have some media links that you'll want to review as well. I want to talk a little bit about reading levels. Now, when we talk about the readability of a text, a lot of different texts that you'll find in the bookstores or libraries are leveled. They'll say level 1.1, 1.2. Those refer to grade levels, and the different companies and publishers, they level those as best they can for students. But just because a student is in first grade does not mean that a level 1.1 or 1.2 is appropriate for them. So what we need to talk about actually are reading levels. And each child has their own personal reading levels. They actually have 3 of them. The first one is their independent level. This is a book that they can read very easily on their own. They sound fluent, they're happy with it. A lot of times it's a self-selected text. So these are great books to give to a child at the beginning of a lesson that would get them excited and feeling confident about reading before you jump into some of the harder stuff. It's also something that if they can read a book independently, that you can give them on their own after your lesson to practice maybe with their parents on the nights that you're not working with them. The next level I want to talk about is their instructional level, and I know you probably know a lot about Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development and scaffolding, and that's what we're talking about with this instructional level. These are texts that are just a little bit difficult for the student. Not so hard that they're completely frustrated, but it's just a little bit hard enough that we're actually teaching them something. So the type of scaffolding that you might give them for this type of a text is maybe introducing them to some of the vocabulary terms ahead of time, or activating their prior knowledge about the subject so they can then comprehend what they're reading. You might talk about some of the phonics elements that they'll encounter if perhaps they're more of a beginning or a fledgling reader. Talk about some of the sight words they might see for the beginning and fledgling reader. So the different kinds of scaffolding and instruction that you're going to provide for this instructional level will of course depend on the different level of reader that you have. The last level we're talking about is the frustration level. A lot of times you can tell by sight that a child is reading a frustrational level book. This would be if they're getting 1 word out of 10 or more incorrect as they're reading. This book is going to be on the frustration level. They may get a little fidgety in their seats. They may groan and moan, put their head down, or complain. This is frustration. We don't want to give them anything really on the frustrational level. The only reason that we test until we get to the frustration level is to really know what the end of that instructional level is, so we know as an educator not to give them any materials on a level that's just too hard for them. So when you're giving them the different reading tests that are in our DLI, once you find out what their instructional, independent, and frustration levels are, then this is going to help you determine what books and what level of books you're going to use when you're creating your lesson plans. So that brings us to what your assignment is for this week. You are going to develop a plan of instruction that is based on all of those assessments that you've just given. Um, so remember that the main point of this whole course is that assessment drives instruction. So you're going to include all of the original assessments. You can go ahead and scan those in so I see the students' work. Include the score sheets so that I know that you scored those properly. There are summary sheets in the developmental literacy inventory that help you put all of that information onto one page altogether so you can kind of see it all in one spot. That's all going to get included. In addition to that, you are going to create a plan of what you're going to be actually doing with this child for the next 7 weeks of class. And that plan is you're going to talk about the areas of need for the student. Every child actually has an area of need. Even if they're reading well above grade level, well, then they're going to have an area of need for that high level of reading that they're doing, right? So keep that, don't just tell me, oh, my student is excellent and doing great, doesn't need any instruction. That's just not going to be true. Every student can be pushed a little further and can be worked with. That's why we have educators, and that's why they go to school. So think about what their areas of need could be. It could be fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, phonics, any one of those things, sight words. Decide what you're going to focus the most on and write a plan of what you're going to do. Now, if you're stuck and you don't know exactly what the instructions should look like, it's a really great idea to check out page 407 of your developmental literacy inventory, because right there it talks about, okay, you're done with the assessments, now what do I do for instruction? So there's a few pages in your DLI that help you with that, and then also it'd be a great idea to go back and consult the chapter reading that has to do with a different type of reader your child is. So if you have a beginning reader, go back and reread that beginning reader chapter. It has tons of great ideas of things to do with a beginning reader, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel and come up with all your own activities from your own head. This book has some great activities. There are websites that have been shared in the media links and also by your own classmates that will have some really great ideas of what to do with the student too. So go in there, decide what the area of need is, consult your texts, and then we're going to write about it. And when you're writing about it, you need to make sure that you're referencing all those different tests that you gave. So for example, you might say, since the child missed 5 out of 10 on X test, I need to do Y instruction. We don't just make up some instruction out of nowhere, or because they're in first grade, I'm going to give this first grade assignment. That doesn't actually work. We're doing this specifically for the child that took these tests. So please reference those tests. And then, of course, you also need to reference your textbook and your DLI so that I know that you're understanding that material as well. You also might be starting to think about your lesson plans on a day-to-day basis, because this plan of assessment is kind of a general, this is what I'll be working with the student on, but also you're going to be soon thinking about what you're going to do with the child every single day. And remember that the portfolio actually requires you to keep a lesson plan and observations, anecdotal notes of every single time you meet with that child. I don't need a really formal, 3 or 5 page lesson plan, because that's just really not function, functional for this particular class. What I need is just a good idea of what you planned to do with the student, what they actually did, and then how you feel about that. And if you would like a great example of what the lesson plan should look like, please go back and check out page 129 of your Gillett text, because it has a really great idea of a lesson plan, and you don't even have to type it. It could be handwritten as long as I can read it, of course, and then you would need to scan that in as well. But it talks about how a lesson should look with the beginning and fledgling readers. Now, if you have a developing reader, you might change the plan slightly, and instead of doing a phonics task, you might do a vocabulary or a comprehension task, but the plan itself could look a lot like the chart that's on this page. So go ahead and check out page 129. That's going to save you a lot of time and effort if you check that out. And those should be included every single time you meet with your students. So I know what you're doing. And then each lesson really needs to build on the lesson prior to it. One other assignment that you have this week is a discussion board. You're going to be talking about what assessments you should be giving a developing reader and what would you do to help a struggling developing reader in only one of these areas. Just pick one: phonics, word knowledge, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. You're also going to turn in your assessment chart. So your assessment chart should have a lot of new assessments that were talked about in the previous 3 modules. So turn that into the discussion board as an attachment as well. And that's all we have for this week. Again, if you have any questions at all, a great place to ask those is on the questions for the professor forum, because that way everyone can benefit from your question. If you have a private question, of course you can email me anytime or call me during my office hours, which are Wednesday nights from 8:30 to 9:30. If that time doesn't work for you, I'm happy to talk to you another time. Just go ahead and email me. We'll set up a time. That way I can make sure that I'm available and I have the materials I need to answer the question that you may have. Thank you again for your time. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say about developing readers and writers and the assessments that they need and the instruction that you plan to give them.